Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Isaak Tsalicoglou. Based in Athens, Isaak is an expert in the development, launch, and management of products, from tangible hardware products to software and services, as well as the development of systems, product portfolios, product segments, and in developing and leading functional and cross-functional teams. Along with his co-host Bruno, he's also the host of the Puzzle podcast, where they take 10 minutes to address difficult business questions. You can find him on LinkedIn at @Isaak with a K at the end, where you can read his popular posts. Isaak is the author of a number of Leanpub books, including The Incredible Story of Deft, What Nobody Told You About Business Hype, Northwind Elixir Traders, a practical tutorial on databases with Ecto, The Cave, Competing Against Incumbents, and the Lo and Behold X series. In this interview, we're going to talk about Isaak's background and career, professional interests, his books, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience as a writer of both popular posts and books. So thank you very much, Isaak, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
Thank you, Leonard.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you found your way to where you are now in your career.
So I grew up in Athens, Greece. I was here until the moment I was 18 and a half. Then I finished my high school studies and I headed for Switzerland, where I studied at ETH Zurich for 5 years. I studied mechanical engineering, and however, throughout the 5 years of studies, I always had a tendency to bring computers into everything. So I did simulation of various systems, processes, either combustion of, the particle synthesis in flames. I always like to model things. So I'd say I'm a mechanical engineer. My friends know me that I really annoy them by how much I say I'm an engineer, which is fine. It's part of my identity to a large part, but I did not really have a lot of love for the mechanical stuff. I like understanding things, modeling things, building things. And so I found my way into software from a very, very young age. So when you see the origin story, something like a super villain or something, but my first computer was an IBM 5055, the portable PC that my father's first PC, and I played Donkey.Pass on it, and people might know Alley Cat. So I was into computers from a very, very young age, and what happened was, at the beginning, I would always get the hand-me-downs from my father, and at some point I started to leapfrog him, so I would have the first Pentium, and then he would use it for the office, because we have a family business in Greece, and so also saw business from a young age. But generally, my father was also very, very much into computers from a young age. I mean, coaxial cables. Actually, the fact where I live now used to be the old office of the company. So where I'm sitting, I've sat when I was 3 or 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
I mean, tried to program BASIC and doing for loops with beeps and so on to simulate the sound of an engine. I mean, I was a computer geek from a young age. And what really has colored my professional development and my hobbies is my discovery of Linux back in 1997. It was, for a moment, it seemed like a fad back then. We were all anti-Microsoft. All the cool nerds were anti-Microsoft and anti-Bill Gates and everything. So when Linux was finally, let's say, more easy to use with Red Hat 5.0 and SUSE Linux, if people remember, I was really, really invested in Red Hat 5.0 on my 486. Those were great times. I mean, I like school and everything. I like it, but what I really like is computers from a very young age. So anyway, that colored my whole story also in the studies. Like, if I can simulate something, I will do it. If I can take an idea I have and model it with a quick spreadsheet or Python code, I will do it. I hate leaving things dangling. If I do not understand the system, I get really annoyed. So this is a big part of what I do and how I work. So
yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. That's a very interesting. One of the great pleasures of doing this podcast and running Leanpub is we get to talk to authors from all around the world with all kinds of different backgrounds, and I get to satisfy my own curiosity about certain things. Now we've recorded a few launch videos for your books earlier this week, and I believe you mentioned that you had to do military service.
Yeah, it's a mandatory military duty in Greece for every able-bodied male after 18, so older than 18 years old. And if you are studying, you can postpone it, but at some point you have to go. And that can be a widely varying experience depending on which kind of unit you are headed to, which location, and what matters mostly is, in my view, what's up here. Like if you really do not want to do this, you will hate it. If you are okay to curious about it, and if you also happen to have a great military commander, and I was very lucky to have one great person, it can be a very, very good experience, very enriching one, like a job where you learn to talk to people, and even though you might have a rank as an officer, I was a reserve officer, you have a rank, and you learn that if you play things by rank, you didn't win anything, you didn't learn anything, you just were the guy who was the authoritarian. So for me, it was personally a very good experience, but the opinions vary wildly among Greeks. For many, it's just a waste of time.
Was it 6 months or a year?
I think now it's 9 months, but when I went, it was 12 months plus 5 months if you choose to become what we call like a cadet officer. So total 17 months.
Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. And so I'm curious. I've had people who've gone to university in Switzerland on the podcast before, but I've never really asked them about what it's like. And I think most of our listeners are probably from North America, and so their idea of university is 4 years for an undergraduate degree, 2 terms every year. Each term is 4 months, and you take five classes every term, kind of thing. And what's the structure like? What was the structure like for you?
Okay, I've only been to this university, so ETH Zurich, but from what I know from friends, and I have many friends who studied in Germany, in France, UK, other countries, Spain, European universities tend to be more rigid. So the idea of the European university, as I understand it, is different in that it does not pretend to take someone who's rough, let's say, not cosmopolitan, or doesn't know many things, and turn you into a well-rounded person, which means that in Europe, we tend to emphasize the actual topic that you're studying. We don't have a minor and a major. We don't have that pressure to do extracurriculars to get admitted, or to, if you're doing engineering, you're not going to be required to also do a minor in psychology or pick some sociology classes. Those are, you sprinkle them, they're required, but they are not, they're just by the way. There are a few lectures I had to take. For example, I took organizational psychology. I took, English writing, just because I was good at it and I always liked it. And I didn't care to do economics when I was studying engineering, because in my mind, I could do this at any moment in the future. So the difference is, in my view, it's more regimented, and it is not as, don't get me wrong, I'll call it fluffy. In the US, things I see are fluffy. And also a big decision for why I didn't go to the US to do my studies is because even though I was admitted in the US, I realized actually the first year of a bachelor's, this is math, physics, chemistry, and whatever that we already do in Greece in the last 2 years of high school. I'm not going to argue which system is best. It's a whole huge story. It's just that in terms of ETH, it was very regimented. It was also the last batch before switching to the so-called Bologna system, where in Europe we established the bachelor's and master's coupling, so that you can study a bachelor's here and go to another university and do a master's, or come from another study, do your bachelor's diplomas, it's called, in Greece, and then come to ETH and do a master's. And the system before and after was quite different in that it was very rigorous. It was, I think, if I remember correctly, we started 280 people in 2001 in October. And over the first 2 or 3 weeks, I remember people playing Counter-Strike.
Right.
5 or 6 people, they were never seen again, because they that's not what you don't have the time to do that. And then the rule of thumb back then, I don't know if it's still the case, was that after every batch of testing. So you do your first year, you study in the summer, and then you used to take the first pre-diploma exam, it's called. And then you have a failure rate of 35%. It's graded on a curve. So 35% only have one more chance to take the exam, the whole exam. And then after those that remain, after the second year, same story, second pre-diploma exam. From the 65% remains. And so what ends up happening is the beginning is very strict. So it's really, really rigorous. It's almost military style. It is many hours of study every week. It is not easy. It is not simple. And after the third year, first 2.5 years, where you have mastered the, studying and being focused and learning so many things, in my view, that's when it became enjoyable for me, because I was also able to shape my curriculum instead of it being on rails, common topics. It's very different to the US system, for what I know. And not saying this to say, it's so amazing. It's just not for everyone. It is vice versa. Also, the US system is not for everyone. I think that the US system would not have fared so well, because I need the structure when I have a huge curriculum, which is 4.5, 5 years of studies. I need the structure to know where to head, and then I will dive deep into the other things by myself. But I find the American system, for me personally, was too loose somehow. Disregarding the financial aspects, disregarding that's a whole different topic that I'm not a big fan of anyway.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. That's just so fascinating. I personally just love to hear about different educational systems. It's interesting that, for example, it's kind of like with respect to rigidity and structure, it's kind of the opposite at the doctoral level compared between say the Oxford and Cambridge model and the North American model.
Yeah.
Cambridge is different. I shouldn't talk about the tabs, but like at Oxford, they kind of like, my joke that I always tell on the podcast is that like you arrive, there's a little bit of, watching, but they basically you can allow yourself to be flown out like a kite, and then they come back 3 years later and like, where's your thesis? Whereas in a North American PhD program, it's going to take long. You're going to do a couple of years of classes. You're going to have to take comprehensive exams. You're going to have to do some teaching probably. You're going to have a committee watching you the whole time. So you're kind of still a student instead of a scholar when you're doing a doctorate. And but anyway, just to share a story. So it's funny. I come from the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. The University of Saskatchewan has a very good engineering program, and so good that back in the day, the rest of the universities tried to get them to make their curriculum easier because it was making them look bad. And they felt that they were as I recall, the University of Toronto wanted to see itself as dominant, but there were these University of Saskatchewan graduates who were just obviously better than theirs. So they tried, instead of getting better than, this is a very, very Canadian story, instead of getting better themselves, they tried to maintain their position in the hierarchy by making the University of Saskatchewan lower its standards, which they didn't do. But anyway, when it comes to attrition rates, they didn't grade on a curve. But from what I recall, there was basically the concept of December graduates. So these were typically sort of like hale and hearty farm kids who did the farm kid version of playing video games, i.e. drinking, instead of studying, and typically came from families where where maybe the parents had never gone to university, and they were like, well, school is job training, engineering is a good job, so go do engineering. And there's all these 18-year-olds who had no real interest in it at all. And I think the attrition rate was something like the one you were describing, at least, for arbitrary reasons.
It's I find the systems with an attrition rate, as long as not psychopathic, it's not imposed just because, and it's tied to rigorous testing and some quality assurance criteria. I find them more honest, especially if you have an influx of people who have been told to study something, be it engineering, computer science, whatever, and they don't want to do this.
Yeah.
I think it's really, I find it way more respectful to the person to not fan the flames of illusion that you do engineering and you do computer science, then money rains from the heavens. And say, hey, if you don't love this, if you're not, it's not a failure to not have what it takes to be an engineer. In the same way that it's not a failure to not have what it takes to be an economist, what the like literature expert. Everyone has their own kind of strengths and also wants. It's just that if you take anyone, regardless of the study, and you put them on rails and say, hey, here, go, and you also promise them that success will come, and you don't care whether they like it, what are you building? You're just building regret and a kind of disillusion again, because people study things they don't want, get jobs that they're not interested in an economy that might not exist by the time they graduate. So I find systems that are more, not aggressive, but more selective. It's also respectful towards the person. I think it's an important thing.
Yeah, that's so well said. At building regret reminds me of two things. One is that one of the reasons the North American university system typically has that kind of very general first year, where you're not allowed to specialize, is for that very reason. It's like you're 18. Who knows what brought you here? You shouldn't be. You do typically have to choose a major anyway, but you sort of take a bunch of different courses to give you a chance to see them all. And you might be like, I really want to be a chemist. I really want to study chemistry, and you're like, no, I love physics. And so you get that, or philosophy. And you sort of learn what the opportunities are. So you might have been told your whole life, if you study English, you're not going to be able to get a job. And then you meet someone like me who studied English and became an investment banker, and you're like, there's actually plenty you can do with that degree. And it just recalls to me too, a friend of mine was a junior dean at an Oxford college, and in the Oxford system, like, you pick one major and that's all you study. And you can attend lectures on other things if you want to, just like arbitrarily, and there's plenty going on. And there was often that university, at least at the time, I believe, had the highest suicide rate in the UK of any university. And it's like, because there's kids who are like, they might still be 17, and they're like, have I made a terrible mistake? I'm going to be studying this one subject, learning nothing else for 3 years, you turn off out of reactions. But they're off now. But anyway, yeah. But that is also sort of meant to be a kind of like one of the reasons that system exists is like teaching you to stick to it, teaching you a little bit about diving in, teaching you about commitment and things like that. So, which is all to say, higher education is a very complex thing, very cultural.
Very, very complex, very cultural, and massively important and impactful on the trajectory of a country and its people. And I agree with you in that, how many people have studied something just because their parents were this. Like, we have a joke in Greece that your parents are doctors, you will be a doctor. Your parents are engineers, you will be an engineer. Your parents are lawyers, you will be a lawyer. And so many people, they don't pick, they don't select. It's been selected for them. Personally, if you ask me in terms of engineering, is for me, first of all, the university for me is not a job finding machine. In my view, engineering is a skill set. And I don't like the gatekeeping. For sure, if you go through a rigorous engineering training, you have embedded, hopefully, the thinking as an engineer in your mind to a degree that it's part of you. It does not mean that if you spend, 10 years engineering software, which doesn't have the same, requirements as civil engineering, mechanical engineering, the norm standards. Okay, so not exactly the same kind of engineering, but the trade-off thinking, the understanding of systems, what changes what, how things interact, the physics behind the system, even if latency of a network and why this cannot go faster and what happens with architecture, all those are engineering amenable topics. You can be, I find it's fair to say, oh, I'm a software engineer. Who will give you that title? I mean, in my view, you will give yourself the title, or somebody else will recognize your engineering mindset because you have proven that you think like an engineer. And I don't like the gatekeeping. I mean, for sure, I'm not happy if somebody who just develops or codes a program says, I'm a software engineer, because, well, maybe you are, maybe you're not. If you are, and miraculously you have managed to display the engineering mindset, just because you spend 1 year programming, then wow, amazing. You could have already done engineering, right? But I find that this distinction is important. At the same time, people get too hung up on it. It's not a job. It's a way of thinking, a way of solving problems, and of actually also diving deep and getting your hands dirty. So you become an engineer because you can or because you want to, who knows, right? The eternal question of nature versus nurture. I think that those of us who have studied engineering, we already have the bent towards the analytical, and the studies really reinforce that. So all of my friends who have done R&D, product development, and I have a friend who's doing an amazing work as a system engineer, and he also is an engineer. And the way we think is in trees somehow. So if you ask me a very simple question, like I had to answer a question yesterday to the co-founder of a startup, I'm the GMO. Isaak, he said, how many concurrent users will the web app be able to handle? That, to somebody who comes from, he's an engineer too, but he comes from the business world much more so. So he wants a number. I always think as an engineer, I want to know the sensitivity. What does it mean we can handle X users? Under which conditions? Is it a realistic estimate or not? What might impact this? How far off will I be from reality? What is the risk that I'm wrong? This is innate. It comes out in the way of thinking. I don't even have to think about it. It's not honestly, it's not a superpower. Sometimes it's annoying because you can never simplify. It's difficult to simplify. It's difficult to say the number is 100 because your mind's always, well, the number is 100. If so many people hit that endpoint at the same time, so I'll do an Apache benchmark to see how many, and the guy says, well, okay, I think from a discussion that 100, we can deal with 100, you given that server configuration. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's say 100. And I know, well, maybe it's 300. Maybe it's 70, but probably not. So there's this sensitivity analysis that happens in an engineer's mind, I find, and the pursuit of not oversimplifying, that sometimes becomes over-complexifying. That's our illness as engineers. And that's a tricky thing to learn to. It's like a slider. You can set it to, oh my God, nobody understands how I'm thinking, to, yeah, basically I had no value because I just need something that is oversimplistic. It's a tricky part. But I love it.
I really identify with that way of thinking. Particularly for my approach, it wouldn't be engineering; it would be language. And it would be like, people are like, "What does this word mean?" And it's like, well, come on now, that word's been used many times in many different contexts. In what context are we using it here? No, people don't want to hear that. And I mean, one of my little hobby horses is, a lot of people force other people into saying false things out of a misguided sense of being realistic. They're like, give me the data, give me the number. And it's like, there's no number. You're not, I'm not evading, I'm not being evasive. And then this is now the sort of gripe. One of the things that a manager like that, for example, will do is they'll demand a number from you. Like, what's the most users that can use this thing at a time? You say 100. And then, because they need you to lie, because they won't accept the truth, which is that it's a range based on conditions. And then they'll come back later and be like, there were 110 people on the system. How's that possible? You told me 100.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, now do you want the real answer? Then you're fired, for talking back. And anyway, and like, if you want to know why, if anyone listening wants to know, one of the reasons you hear about these huge software projects failing to do, say, simple things like in Canada, payroll for government employees, it's because there's people demanding falsehoods from the engineers.
Yeah, what happens is actually, I've seen it happening also for development projects. Everyone is asked for a number, the specification, or some kind of a performance. How well does something satisfy functional requirements? How many concurrent users? What kind of torque will you have? How deep will the radar see? Those are all examples from like actual experience. And the reality is really black and white. Like, for example, I worked on radars before. So radars to look into concrete or to look in the underground. It's called ground penetrating radar. There is a very used and abused metric to evaluate how good a radar system is how deep can it see. And anyone who knows, who has used a radar, knows that it's a transition between, okay, it depends on the bandwidth of your device, the size, which is linked to the size of your antenna, which also depends on how well it's designed, how it radiates, which also that ties into what kind of soil you have in the ground, how wet this is a whole bunch of stuff. But people say, oh, it can see down to 60 centimeters. And then you put an asterisk under ideal conditions on. But people then fight in the market, like in the cave book, right? They go, I can do 61, I can do 62. But the nuance is lacking. And then if you get into marketing BS, because you're giving numbers that actually have no meaning in reality, just to be able to leapfrog the competitor. And what happens is when people are asked to provide during the development a specific value for something that's complex, what do? They hedge their bets a bit. They say, well, I'll give a bit, let's have some buffer. In the same way that if somebody asks how many people the server can handle, I would say, well, it can handle this, and we need to have a buffer. So over provision. What happens is when you have a complex system and everyone adds a bit here, a bit there, buffers, the whole system ends up becoming very, very heavy in the way that it has buffers everywhere. So when you put it together, it's over-engineered or it's over-complexified. And that also leads to products being heavier, slower, more complex, whatever, more expensive, take longer time to develop than what people expect. Because if you do not allow people to explore the trade-offs, and that's, in my view, that's the biggest thing in developing anything. If people do not understand trade-offs, so they can not haggle, but they can talk among different disciplines. It doesn't matter if it's the product manager talking to a development guy about if we hit this, then what happens with the performance? Okay, if we have this performance, how will we compete with that incumbent? If those discussions don't happen, then everything is nailed to the wall. And then everybody says, well, okay, I gave my number. And I also added some buffer so that, you can remind all that. And then you end up having the system, and then on top of it, buffers. And the system is, oh my God, why is it so expensive? Because everybody tries to cover their back by over-provisioning here, playing it safe there, and that's not how good products are developed. You need this to make good products happen.
Yeah, that's so well said. It's funny. It's the other side of my gripe, which is like everything's really complicated. Is like the manager who's like got a team of engineers, every single one of whom is really preoccupied with their own side of things, and some, in the end, decisions need to be made, and specifically trade-offs need to be made. A kind of classic example in the modern city is, the firefighters are always going to want bigger trucks, because it's basically, for cultural reasons, but they're going to object, for example, to speed bumps on roads, and it's like, well, mostly, I'm thinking of an article I read about this recently. It's like mostly what firefighters do nowadays is respond to car accidents, and they want to get to the car accidents faster, so they don't want speed bumps, but the speed bumps cut down the car accidents, and it's kind of like, well, what are we doing here, right? Are we optimizing for when the emergency happens or decreasing emergencies? And of course, most people would they think about it rationally in the cold, bath of reason, they're like, well, we want to decrease the number of emergencies. But then the sort of striking story of it took 2 minutes longer for the fire truck to get to an emergency because it had to slow down for speed bumps. Then, that's what sticks in people's minds. And so the trade-offs are like, well, now you're navigating public, reception of an emergency response and stuff like that. And like, there's just, anyway, that's just a sort of, example of how complex these things can get.
It reminds me of something I was discussing with a friend, that every rule set you impose, for example, let's say you have a slider, whether we have 0 speed bumps to a lot of speed bumps. So when you have a lot of speed bumps, then the root cause is alleviated, But if something happens, which you cannot always catch a priori, then you will have, I don't know, the firefighters won't get that fast and so on. Which means that often there is not often, I believe that there are very few cases where you can have a solution that satisfies everything and everything is black and white. We found the perfect solution. Vice versa, I was discussing with a friend that every rule you impose is basically like a machine learning classifier. And every classifier has false positives, false negatives. So we pretend also with laws, with rules, with policies in work, in product development projects, in whatever, in societies, to strike a balance between something having, something being too strict or too lenient. But in reality, no rule you will find, you will establish. But imagine if you have one rule, you always have something that falls off the wayside. Right? Okay, you put everywhere, make the roads wavy. Nobody can speed anymore.
Right.
Yeah, but in the case that some car crashes because some other freaky reason, perhaps because the road is now wavy, now nobody can reach it. So are we really capable of optimizing exactly the number of speed bumps per 100 meters? It's nonsense, right? This kind of planned mindset that we can model everything, it's not even worth it. So we strike a balance where it's acceptable. Again, in my view, it has to do with any kind of policy. And then you have the influence of the media or the sensationalism where people go, oh my God, it took 2 minutes longer. It's like, yeah, okay, it's a system. It's not going to be perfect every time, but take a step back and look at the long-term trends, how things have been dropping, for example, accidents in some countries. So it's all very complicated. Even with one rule, and you change one parameter, right? How many speed bumps per 100 meters? I already have two things you need to optimize for. And some will find a reasonable compromise or trade-off. Now add another 1,003 things about, I don't know, environmental. Are never going to find something that works perfectly. And we have to live with that and not pretend to be capable of establishing utopic things. I mean, utopia is a Greek word, means no such place. Yeah. Utopos, right? So, but it sells clicks and it sells views and it sells outrage that, oh my God, why did they not reach the car, that the car was burning? It should have been, could. So, I say, if my grandma had wheels, she would be a bus, right?
That's very
so
good.
That's my mini rant about trade.
No. So speaking of things to rant about, I think this is probably the right time to move on to the next section of the interview where we talk about your book or books. And I wanted to start by talking about your book about Deft. Can you talk about how that book got started? It's a really cool story, and what that book is about.
So there's a very nice segue from the previous section in that. So after working, as I studied, my military duty, I worked a bit here in Greece in the family business doing sales. And I went back to Switzerland. I started working on R&D. And then I did my MBA. Then I went to a fantastic company called Hilti, where I did a lot of things. I learned a lot. And for family reasons, because I had less the family, I decided to be more flexible, something that the company couldn't afford at the time because of my career progression plan. So I left. And I had flexibility for 1.5 years to do my own thing in Switzerland as a consultant, which is, this is the name of the old company I had, Noito, which means all Noito. So whoever understands, will understand. And in that duration, I decided to bet on content marketing to find customers. So yes, I was picking up the phone and calling, doing cold outreach and my network. But I decided to start writing, and I always liked writing, and I haven't done it in a long time. In the book about what was about North illicit in the video about North illicit traders, I remember mentioning that I go back to my roots because in the first company I worked for, which was ABB Turbo Systems doing turbochargers, documenting processes and things was enshrined in a culture. That was a huge deal. I mean, it was amazing. I could reach back to the 70s and find insights about machinery that was useful nowadays. And so, long story short, what happened was after I So while I was doing that, this consultancy activity in Switzerland, I decided to write. So I decided to write an article. Back then, LinkedIn had just started making articles available. So they tried to become a medium. Didn't succeed, but LinkedIn doesn't succeed in many things, to be honest. So I wrote an article. It got good feedback. It was on lean management and how you need to tread the middle ground so don't fall for the hype. It was okay. But most importantly, I enjoyed it. And over the next months, I kept writing. And what happened was 1.5 years after I started this business, I did some things. It was not fantastically successful for reasons that have to do with the product. And so I tried to also do APIs, machine learning APIs for R&D, which I used to do before. It didn't fly. So I also did some consultancy. And I found customers, clients, potential clients in Switzerland were asking me about Agile. Agile was like 2016, 2017. Agile was super, ultra hot, especially in Switzerland and in Germany in general. And over the course of this 1.5 years, I grew so disillusioned with the theater, the facade of continuous improvement by way of the lean recipes or agile recipes or Scrum, and we come into tralala with posters on the wall and we do post-its on the wall and all that nonsense. It has nothing to do with agility, just agility theater. That I remember being here in Greece for Easter, which is something I always do. I've always been here for Easter. And those thoughts were swirling in my head that, what am I doing here? Like, I'm wasting my time. Like, okay, I didn't do my API machine learning thing didn't work out. To get revenues, I went back to produce improvement and so on, which is a topic that I like, but I don't feel comfortable tying my professional identity with that, and increasingly I had a sour taste about what I was seeing that people were posting about. Too much fluff, too many false promises, too many, I don't know, how to say it. Too much admiration for things that look cool, like Toyota. Ooh, Toyota, the sensei of Toyota, it's like Mr. Miyagi of Toyota. He will sternly look at you and tell you, Isaak, son, you do not do this like my forefathers in this kind of mindset, like, oh, the Japanese do those things, that must be amazing. It was ridiculous. So I remember it was Easter, the week of Easter, and I sat down and I decided to bang out an article. I just brain down. And I remember when I was writing this, at some point I laughed. I found it ridiculous. Because it started off as an idea, as an article, talking about how it's really amazing that all those things, Lean, Agile, Six Sigma, Scrum, design thinking, all those buzzwords, somehow, if you look at them, they're all the same. Not in the content, even though they have lots of similarities in content, but in the way the story plays out, has to do with the hype cycle, has to do with the human psychology and how people fall for the latest shiny object, many, many aspects. And I remember I wrote a few pages and I found it funny. Like when I laugh at what I write, because I write it for myself, just brain down, I know I'm on a good track. I don't care if people read it. That was the mindset at that point, but I know it helps me. And I wrote the article and I posted it. And it's a long article. It's like 3,600 words. I already got feedback from a couple of friends saying, Isaak, nobody reads that. Like, it's too long. Like, what are you writing there? Stick to shorter articles because these have high conversion. And you know what? I didn't care about conversion. But it was funny because I posted it, and a good friend of mine said, oh, this is going to go far. I said, oh, I can go. I mean, it's a super long article, and it's super cryptic. Who's going to understand that I'm talking about Lean, Agile, and all that? So she said, every time that it hit that, what was it, at 5,000 views, you're gonna pay for dinner. We were group of people. We used to go to what was the Argentinian steakhouse close to Liechtenstein, so in Austria. So yes, whatever, never gonna happen. Some say. So a few days pass, 2,000 views, 3,000 views, 5,000 views. I think it had 25,000 views. It got 400 plus comments. And I did something which I didn't do deliberately. Every time somebody would come in a comment and say, Def, what is this? This yet another management framework. You're you're scamming people. I was like, absolutely. Yeah, I respond, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And people saw that. So that was before the algorithm changed on LinkedIn. So I do think it's not that, I'm not saying the article was amazing. It had something, but I was also benefiting from the fact that LinkedIn at the time didn't have this engagement thing. Basically, it was based on timeline. So every time somebody commented, and I commented, it pushed it up on the feed. So kept hitting more and more eyeballs. And 25,000 views later and 400 something comments later, I said, there is something here. I'm not the only one who feels this disillusionment. I knew that, but the response was insane. And that led to me writing the book as a farewell while I was looking for my next, for the next job. I turned it to a book. So during parallel to the job search, I would spend many hours every day, which was something enjoyable for me, to write and polish and write, and the process at the same time was very psychotherapeutic to say goodbye to something that for 2 or 3 years, it almost became my professional identity. And that's how the first version of the book came to be. And since then, I found out that basically if I'm going to write something, I cannot write because somebody asks me to, except if it's something I find interesting. So everything I've written so far has sprung from the need to process something, to come to terms with something, so to explore something and to document it for my own use. And since I don't think I'm somebody who is, I think my needs to understand things are prevalent in many other people who think in similar ways, like the North Willis Trader's book. If I find it interesting, especially if I find it enjoyable, I will publish it. That's my idea. Or if I have friends who I know see the value in it. So it's not my job to be a writer. It's something between a hobby, a strength. I don't know. It comes easy to me. I can write many words. Doesn't mean that they're good words. But I can iterate really fast on ideas. So usually that's a path I will take. Like the X book. Sorry to ramble on, but slowly this. The X book started as a comment. It turned into a LinkedIn post. That turned into a draft. That turned into a first chapter. That turned into me chuckling at myself because I found it funny how I was writing this pseudo-archaic language. I said, we're doing this. So just in frenzy, every day I would write. Not because I'm terribly disciplined. I can be, but it doesn't come just like this. But because I really enjoyed it. And because also sharing it with friends, I got great feedback. And they were saying, oh, you know what could happen with Nate? You know what could happen with Bob? So all those ideas, it's like they spur me on. And that's why also in the preface, the book is heavily, it's all collaborative, but I have been cheerled by my friends, by some friends.
That's really interesting note. I mean, you've managed to merge the second and third parts of the typical interview structure together, where we talk about the books and we talk about writing processes and stuff like that. And one thing that I really, really enjoyed about that was what you said at the end there about how sharing your work with your friends while you're writing is a really great practice. It reinforces you in a certain sense that they might be like, oh, that's great. They might confirm a suspicion that you have that a decision was bad. They might be wrong. They might tell you don't write that long article when you really should, and that's actually part of navigating that. And I think a lot of people think that writing a book means going off into a cabin by yourself for 3 years and then coming out with a finished work. And there are people who've done that, but if you look at the history of writing, often, let's just pick literature. When you think about figures like T.S. Eliot or Coleridge or what have you, or I don't know, the Bloomsbury set or whatever. They were sharing their drafts with each other, they were showing each other their work all the time. They were asking for comments. They were fighting, things like that. And a big part of writing is showing your work to other people. And like not just asking like it's good or bad, but like, asking for their ideas, asking for their commentary and things like that. And so it doesn't always have to be this very alone process. But at the same time, putting things out there is risky. Satire, notoriously risky. There's a proportion of the population that will not get the joke.
I saw that happening, and that was the funniest thing. People asking for Deft certification, and where can I get trained? There's like, are you serious right now? Should I start a Deft certification agency?
That's a great part of the story that we talked about in the launch video. But like, so for people, so there was the certain kind of reply guy, as they're called, who was like, you're a scammer. This is just another, made up kind of management framework. And then there were other people who were like, oh, wow, great. A new management framework, which is just amazing. And it's kind of like a sort of unity of form and content. You're kind of proving the point of some of the inherent problems of these management frameworks, which, as we discussed in the video, come into existence typically for very good reasons, but then turn into something else as they get, processed through the various systems. You've written a few other books. We've got videos about them. We'll link to them and stuff like that. They're all on YouTube. But the other book I wanted to talk about with you, have you talk about just for a couple minutes today is The Cave. So if you could talk a little bit about what that book is about and who it's for.
Yeah, so that was another thing that started as a LinkedIn article. And so I see that LinkedIn is a bit like my proving grounds. If I see that something catches on or gets good feedback, doesn't need to get thousands of views or many clicks. It needs to get good feedback from the right people. I prefer the sniper approach instead of the shotgun approach. I don't go for width. I go for depth or specific things depending on what I write. So this started because at the time when I wrote this, I was head of product management in a company called Prosec, a company with an amazing product portfolio. It's seriously a company that really kicked the butt of an entire industry between 2017 and 20. I think it still does with some of its products. It's in an industry that is very stalwart, very slow. It's quality inspection of materials and structures. So if you want to check the hardness of a metal because it goes on an airplane, or you want to evaluate your compressive strength of the wall because you just built a new house, or if you want to dig because you want to install, because you want to do some repairs in the road and you need to dig and you don't want to hit telecoms cables, or if you want to dig a trench and you want to figure out whether you're going to hit, a hole in the ground. It doesn't matter. It's basically looking, to put it very simply, it's equipment for looking into things and look into things at the surface of things. So in this company, when I joined, the company had just launched a seriously insane product. If people, and I have no affiliation with the company since February 2020. No affiliation. It's not a paid ad. I know, but I take care to talk positively about things that I really like. And the company has incredible products. So one of the first one that I took care of was a radar that is handheld. So you roll it over a surface and it sends radar pulse, not pulses, but sends basically synthesizes a waveform, and the waveform bounces on things in the ground or in the wall, and returns. It shows you what's called a radar ground. But the big difference is it's like a little push cart, basically like you're ironing, as if you're ironing your shirt, and it connects over Wi-Fi to an iPad. So instead of all the other manufacturers where you have a screen built in, which can break, it's small, it has a weird proprietary interface, or others who use a crappy Android tablet. I know I've had a few, and they're all generally crappy, except if you go to the Samsung Galaxy, and even then it's rather crappy compared to an iPad. It connects to an iPad, so you can actually have the iPad in one hand, put it, prop it somewhere, and you can roll the probe, and it gives you data. And it means you can pinch and zoom and do 3D representation. It's insanely revolutionary. But now this is a company that has existed since 1950-something, in 1954, and it enters it comes from a segment which has been present, but it enters a product category, which is ground penetrating radar for structural inspection, where there is already stiff competition and 3 or 4 players, one of which is huge, and it's the incumbent. It's super big incumbent, has basically defined the product category for historical reasons. How do you fight them? And I realized that, so it struck me at some point that, hey, the arguments that those people are making, because they feel threatened by the product that we are marketing, that we're selling, they are not particularly genuine. Like if you can sense the fear in the other side that they don't know how to handle it because they've been in their own cave, in their own allegorical cave for decades. They have the biggest market share of everyone. So how do they sell? Here's a new radar. 7 years later, here's another radar. 5 years later, here's another radar. But never has there ever been a big jump. And it's interesting to see that usually big jumps in the user experience don't come from the incumbents, except if they are super pressed and they realize, we're going to lose the market. They usually happen because some contender usually sees a gap and says, what are those guys doing? Like back then the thought was, it's 2017. The iPad has existed since 2010. It is touch screen, so Wi-Fi. Why am I still working on a tiny screen, proprietary screen on the device itself? That is a fundamental shift in thinking. The cool thing is, we even published an article as a company, which I think is one of the most amazing things you can do as a company. We published an article in a conference saying, hey, this is our vision for the future of the non-destructive testing industry. Things will become more user-friendly, more interconnected. You can still find it because it's Creative Commons license. Whoever had this idea, the company, salute him, was before my time, but we rolled it as a joint. This means we reveal to the competition as a contender what we're going to do. And the fun fact is, even though we told them what we're going to do, we told them it's there. The playbook is there. We're going to disrupt you based on the pricing model, which was rental and later subscription-based, based on the user experience, based on the technology of the radar, based on this, based on the competitor says nothing. Crickets, sitting ducks, they didn't know how to handle this. And the arguments that came back showed me that they're basically still playing the same old game they've been playing, meaning they know their customers, of course, we're going to trust us, or you're going to trust out the newcomer doesn't know, I've never made that radar, all that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because that's basically what the cave is. It's fun and complacency. And that's how the article came to be. It was it was an evening. I was in the office after a long day, and I don't know what triggered it. Maybe I talked to some customer and gotten stupid arguments about why he should stick to the incumbent model. And I just wrote the article. It took me 3 hours polishing it and everything. And it didn't get much feedback, but got the right feedback from a few people. You can still find the article, by the way, on LinkedIn. One of them said, this is a seminal article, something like this, that we're going to keep looking back at in the next years. And it doesn't matter. It's one person, but I know that person. I trust his views on the industry. And that was a big incentive from saying, I keep it in my back pocket. Something can be made out of this. And when I turned to the book, I expanded it. I didn't fluff it up. I made it nicer. I added some examples. I also added like a self-assessment using Leanpub's functionality where you can download the worksheet to evaluate yourself, whether you are in the cave or whether others in the cave. And that's how this became a book. It's a very short book, but it deserves to be there.
Yeah, that's such a great explanation for anyone who's unfamiliar with Plato's allegory of the cave, which it's based on. Go look it up. It's about epistemology and the theory of knowledge and things like that. But it's just a brilliant idea to take Plato's allegory of the cave and sort of use that as a way of explaining what it's like to be a customer in the environment built by a powerful incumbent company. We're seeing, I mean, as I brought up in the video, because it's, one of my interests, like we're definitely seeing, like, if you want to know what the cave is, if you've ever heard people say, if they plug in a third electric vehicle on your street, the power grid's going to go down. Or if you've ever heard, which was a thing going around in Canada not too long ago, or if you've ever been reading an article about switching from a gas stove to an electric induction stove, and there's comments in the article about what if the power goes out and you're stuck in the cold and the dark, unable to cook a meal for an hour, and
the horror.
The way like fear in particular, fear of the new product, scary stories about it are spread by the incumbent companies, things like that. It's really wild once you sort of like when you've a little bit, I mean, you don't want to be too overconfident, but when you've escaped the cave yourself and you start realizing, there's just all this manipulation going on around us all the time. And it's not a conspiracy. It's like, it's PR, it's marketing, Coke is it, oh, it's it. It's done. We're done with that. It's it. It's important. That's one of the reasons the book is so good, is because it's tying it not just to, the companies, but to that tradition of epistemology and philosophy and thinking about how we think, questioning what we see around us, not in the sense of being like kind of looking for the thrill of having been the one who's penetrated through it, but actually understanding that what Isaac's really talking about is, on a certain level, this newcomer is actually trying to build their own cave. Too, you want to be ethical about it. You want to genuinely believe that you're doing something better, but don't fool yourself. Like, we're all trapped in some system of knowledge. We're all trapped in some set of assumptions and frameworks and things like that. There's no that is what it means to be a person, a thinking person, and that's another really great point that the book is about.
Cynically, a brand is a cave.
Yeah,
think about it. Branding is important. Branding is not the visual design. It's not the logo. There's someone I follow on LinkedIn, Mark Zarian. He does a great post on this, or how we challenge. There's two people that I really trust their views on LinkedIn about branding, and they talk about this in their posts, and I totally agree. It's not your visual identity. It plays a part, but it's the behavior, the language, the touch points. It's across all the touch points, and if you play this right, you will put your customers in some kind of cave. The question is, as a business is, in my view, unfortunately, ends up becoming amoral the bigger it grows, because there's no accountability, because it's the CEO, it's everyone. It's like, corporate responsibility. I mean, if somebody doesn't have responsibility, means that you have some consequence if you do something that is illegal, and not everything that's legal is also moral or it's ethical. Would be friendly. So my bet is on smaller companies where you have a name next to the company, you have a face, you can put a face to the company, not because there will be legal repercussions, but because you always have a relationship with a person. Like, even if it's a huge behemoth, but the company that you're a customer of. If it's a B2C, unfortunately, or that's how it can be, it's usually faceless. If it's B2B, and that's why I'm a B2B guy, not really a B2C guy, there's always can be the salesperson, the sales engineer, the key account manager, the general manager themselves, sometimes the CEO if it's a bigger company. And we do need, I might view, we do need to maintain a bit the sense of honor. This people say that in Asia, which is rather a tendency, of course, it's not a rule, there is this tendency of saving face. And I find that it's not bad to try to save face, but not to save face to not be blamed, but to say, you know what, I try to do the honorable thing because it's my name next to my work. It's not just the brand and the company building and the blah blah and the big talent. People will say Isaak did this or George did this, whoever, and that keeps you accountable, keeps you responsible. And still, you're gonna make mistakes, and that's, by the way, something that a friend of mine also told me recently. As a supplier of services, things can go wrong, but things can go wrong because the reasons that are outside of your responsibility, influence. But the question is how will you recover? How you deal with that? Do you just say, whoa, bye-bye now? Or do you say, we'll fix it? We'll try to figure it out. I'm sorry this happened. This should have been this way, but we'll double down. We'll try to be fair and square, and we'll fix it, even though it might not be as profitable, even though it might cause pain, even though we might have to adjust. And I find, maybe because I grew up in a family business, that this forgoes short-term return, but doesn't ensure, but it supports sustainability of the business. And I don't mean sustainability like environmental. I mean that you exist, and maybe your growth rates are not insane, right? It maybe the business is rather slow because the industry is rather slow. You don't want to become a unicorn because you can't become a unicorn. And I personally would much rather be in such a business than a business that is has a lot of fluff, a lot of pomp based on other people's money. And that's where, I'm going on a tangent now, but the whole thing with venture capital and money raining from the heavens of the last years, this has totally corrupted its incentives and the mindset. The companies show off as being like putting head counts in front of satisfying some customers, putting building features ahead of building a desirable product in totality. And why? Because we got money, so we need to show some kind of crazy return. So basically, you shoot yourself on the foot with a bazooka to satisfy the investor, who is basically a gambler that you're going to be one of the 10. It's messed up, and I think, by the way, it's really the whole tech sector. And I keep reading about tech sector and so what it's been. So it was long overdue for a correction, for rationalization. Long overdue.
Yeah, no, that's also well said. We could talk about that for a long time. It's interesting. You're reminding me about like what can happen to companies that become very big for very long. They can start to, you can be so powerful that you can start to place a positive value on your own weaknesses. And to bring up an example from the car industry, Tesla comes along, and what did the incumbent companies say? They're like, Tesla has no idea how complicated it is to build a car. And Tesla's like, no. Our whole point is to make it simpler to build a car. And they're like, they're sort of, you don't understand how many moving parts there are in a car. It's incredibly difficult to build one of these things. And Tesla's like, that's your biggest weakness. Not something you should be boasting about. And it's just amazing to see how that can happen in companies, and that, like, they can be big, wealthy, very powerful, very incredibly successful, and completely wrong-headed about their approach to their own industry.
They are prisoners of their own cave, and you don't even have to go as for automotive. You don't even have to go to recent years with Tesla, where, of course, to put it nicely, the European automotive, in particular the German automotive industry, was butthurt that somebody came up with something that people actually wanted, which was not a Mercedes and now the BMW, and they started to talk badly about this. And then in parallel, they also built their own EV strategy and so on. After somebody had opened the doors, that's okay. That's an okay strategy, totally okay. I'm not criticizing that, but it can also go a bit earlier when the European Union expanded, and suddenly there was the availability of sending your factory over to Poland or to the Czech Republic, Czechia now, to produce at a lower cost. I don't remember which brand it was, but it used to be a video that circulated from the Geneva Motor Show back in, was it 2008? Was 2007? I don't remember if it was somebody from Volkswagen, and he was looking at the way that the door closes, not on a Skoda, but on a Hyundai or a Kia, and he was showing how it closes pretty nicely. It's not like a tin can. It's clean. We keep telling, and that's also the thing. Yes, you have been telling yourself, why are we great? Because we are great because we're great. We are great because we're number one. And why are we number one? Because we're great. So for years, this is your own inoculation against any nagging self-doubt that, you know what, you're a behemoth in the market. See those guys in Korea? See what they're building? Kia Stinger, for example, for petrol heads like me. Kia Stinger, if you buy the new electric one, I mean, yes, they are not as good as your cars, but they are possible alternatives to your increasingly overpriced vehicles, because they have the classic disruption story where what's the way the diagram, right? It goes up, and basically at some point the low cost competitors are disrupting the product. But but they're not Volkswagen, they're not Alfa Romeo, they're not but the people don't care about your brand anymore, because the car is basically not a status symbol anymore. Not that a whole category. So much, if you think about it, I like this topic because in the end we talk about behemoths, companies, incumbents, but it's a bunch of human egos inside. And it's this epistemological trickiness of everyone is in the cave, and everyone inside is in a cave of their department, of their division, of their nationality. So the question is, how can you bring an organization to preemptively and not reactively say, oh, wait, what are we doing here? Should we maybe doing this differently? And that is actually the source of my passion and frustration about this topic, because I've only worked in premium brands only, and I've seen it from inside. Even the best ones, they have that sickness where some parts of the business, cash cows, incumbents, and you try to see that, hey, maybe change your process, maybe change the way you gather information of the customer, maybe change the way that you structure product development teams so that you can get feedback faster, so that you don't just throw it over the fence to a sales guy and hope that the sales guy will bring it back inside. That was something I worked on. This is a huge topic, and I think it's not a solved one. It will never be solved. It's a human condition.
Regarding feedback, and in the interest of time, the last question I always ask on the podcast, if the guest is a Leanpub author, is if there was one feature we could build for you, or if there was one thing when you're using Leanpub this test, you're shaking your fist going, damn you, Leanpub, that we could fix for you, can you think of anything that you would ask us to do?
Well, really check the one. Because also try to use as many features as possible to try them out. Nothing comes to mind right now. Sometimes I like Markwa. I like generally typing plain text. Okay, I'll give you one input. I have my own GitHub, like GitHub. It's self-hosted. And what I do every now and then, every time I publish a new version, I download the zip and I copy these files over to a Git directory, and then I push them to my Git server. I don't know if there could be a different way of holding your state on the server of the book and some other repository up to date. Because I trust Leanpub to have my data, but you never know. I always take a copy for my own needs, review offline, or to have it. And maybe it can work with webhooks. I haven't tried because I don't have.
So you're writing in the browser,
always,
and then you create the archive on the manuscript versions page, and then you download that and you store that on GitHub.
On my own GitHub. Yeah.
On your own GitHub. Oh, that's interesting. So no, we don't have a feature like what you're asking for. But so for anyone listening, if you write a book in the browser on Leanpub, you've got to trust Leanpub to not lose your work. One of the features we built to sort of help give you this trust is a manuscript versions page, where basically when you preview and publish, we save a version of your plain text manuscript that you can download, that you can create an archive. You can click a button to create an archive and then download a zip file. So then the reasons we built this was basically I was the reason we built this, because I told these engineers, writers want security that they're not going to lose their work, that they have it, that they know what they did, etc. So like, let's create this feature. The idea of like some kind of like API command that you could write that would be like, don't download it, send it to my GitHub repo, for example, or something like that, is an interesting idea.
Or if you're authenticated, you have an API. If you're authenticated, you can send a GET request and it sends you the full text in JSON.
Right. That's super interesting. I will think about that. Yeah, and talk to the team about that.
It's not something that because I release a new version right now with Northwood Elixir traders every 3 to 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
For the other books, I wrote them offline and then I ported them into Leanpub, just copy pasted and then formatted. In fact, I write them in open document. I convert them to Markdown with Pandoc, and then I copy the Markdown format into Leanpub. So, but for Northwood Elixir traders, because it's been written on Leanpub directly from the start, every time I release a new version, I do download the zip file just in case. In case. Paranoia, but it feels better this way.
That's the reason we built it. It's for basically just like for the author's peace of mind.
Yeah, exactly.
You can use that for other things but yeah, that was basically a peace of mind feature. Isaak, thank you very much for that feedback, and thank you very much for taking some time out of late in a Friday evening in Athens to talk to me and to talk to all of us on the podcast.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it and enjoyed the discussion as always.
Thanks.